Welcome back to our new video. Today we are back for another tier list video. This time we're going to be doing running backs from the 2022 to 2023 NFL season. Before we get into, be sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. If you don't know what I do or anything, we do NFL content and Madden content. NFL, we do videos like this, tier list videos. We do week by week picks. We're going to be doing a player type ranking thing. I don't want to give like all it is. It is coming out very soon though. And then a few other ideas for the off season to keep things interesting without football going on. And then Madden, we do Know My Spent series. We do gameplays, we do new content, news, and all that kind of stuff. So if that sounds interesting to you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I cannot talk. Hopefully we can fix that because we have a long video to get into. So as I said in my previous tier list video, that I'm going to go back to the SABCD kind of format for ranking players, because whenever I went away from that with the wide receiver thing, it was both my most liked and most disliked video, and it just didn't really represent accurately my thoughts on the players. I had like CeeDee Lamb in the top 5 and Ja'Marr Chase in top 10 because Ja'Marr was injured, so I couldn't feel like I could have him in the top 5 over healthy receivers, when in reality, when you have like S and A like this kind of stuff, it's easier just to kind of put players that maybe have been injured, in higher lists or that kind of stuff. So regardless though, for this video right here, we have S, A, B, C, D, and injured. So the reason I have the injured thing is because, like I just said, sometimes you can kind of put people that were injured up higher. This is going to be for people that got hurt very early in the season, so that way I don't have them in like an F tier, because like that's not really fair. They didn't really play, you know what I mean? So into the first player, we have Melvin Gordon. I made sure to do some kind of research on this one too, which I'm going to be doing going forward, so that way you guys can have a kind of sense of how each player's performed this year, just in case you didn't know, or maybe you thought they did better than what they did, or maybe you thought they did worse. But Melvin Gordon has 318 yards and 2 touchdowns as of right now. Now, when I'm filming this is, I believe, the 28th. Now, you guys won't be seeing this till probably a week later. So, I don't know what's going to happen this weekend. So, keep that in mind for all these players. Like, these stats are going to be a week behind because this is recorded so in advance. But so, Melvin Gordon, 318 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then he also is not on the Broncos anymore. I'm going to put him in D, honestly. I mean, the Broncos offense as a whole were just terrible. I mean, there really wasn't any good part of that offense. Javonte Williams going on early kind of set the tone for that offense being very disappointing, and it's a shame. Hopefully they can bounce back better next year, though. Next is over to Gus Edwards. He has 415 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm just going to put in probably C. I think he's been probably the best running back for the Ravens. Overall in the entire league, is he like a B tier running back? I don't think so. But the reason I have him above D is because since D is technically our worst, I wouldn't say he's been the worst, because the Ravens offense has struggled without Lamar, and Gus Edwards has honestly stepped up and been a huge help on the ground to at least kind of take the pressure off the pass game. Next, we have Christian McCaffrey, who has 973 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. He has like 600 receiving yards and a passing touchdown, which, I mean, it's just S tier. Like, I'm a Panthers fan. I always love CMC. I'm super happy with how that trade went down, because the Panthers since as a fan, have got a lot better at the rushing game, because we haven't just relied on one player to carry the team. And then for the 49ers, I think CMC really took that offense to the next level and made them an actual Super Bowl contender, which if you haven't seen my Super Bowl contender kind of tier list type thing, like with teams, was last video, go check that out. But yeah, so I am a huge fan of the CMC trade and what he's been doing. Definitely an S tier running back this year for sure. Next is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who has 302 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, and also 151 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm going to put him in the B tier. With Patrick Mahomes, you really don't have the best rushing game because you don't need it. But he's also done pretty well in the receiving game as well. I know we have multiple Chiefs running backs on this tier list, so I'll wait to kind of finish talking about the Chiefs whenever we get there. But for right now, yeah, we'll have CEH in the B tier. Next is Kareem Hunt. He has 455 yards and 3 touchdowns this year. He's going to be in C tier. Now, I know he has technically more rushing yards than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's above them, but it also kind of matters of what all they can do for the team. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a very reliable option, while Kareem Hunt, I think he also requested a trade. He doesn't really want to be there. With Nick Chubb, who's a clear running back one, it seems like they don't really need him. He's had a fine year, I guess, but really, I wouldn't say a bad year, but I wouldn't say a good year either, so I think he fits well in that C tier. Next is Leonard Fournette, who has 640 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. He can go in the B tier. It has been a slow start, although he has got better as the year has gone on. Unfortunately, I don't have his receiving yards and everything written down, because I know he's done a lot in the pass game as well. I wouldn't say a lot, but he's been reliable in the pass game as well. I think it's been a little bit of a disappointing year, especially for like fantasy owners who had him. and he's just kind of disappointed as far as touchdowns has gone. But really, the Buccaneers as an offense, kind of as a whole, I guess, hasn't been that great. So I guess generally speaking, for how their offense has been, I think he's done all right, and I would say he's probably a B tier running back this year. Next is James Conner, who had 703 yards and 3 touchdowns as of right now. He's going to go in the B tier category. The Cardinals have been a really interesting team this year because their record is terrible, but their roster, like on paper, it seems like they'd be very good, and they just really weren't. James Conner, though, did have a solid year. He always manages to get a lot of touchdowns, though it is worth noting that while that touchdown number is high, it didn't really produce in wins. So while fantasy football might be, yeah, he might be great, but I think overall as a running back, he's just a B tier this year. Next, Eno Benjamin, who had 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, although he was since released by the Cardinals, and I believe he's picked up, I want to say like the Texans, but I don't even know if they held on to him. I kind of just want to say D tier. Like, he did well when he was in, but overall, like, was he an amazing running back and he's going to stay in the league? Maybe not overall. Or I guess going forward. So I'm just going to put him in D tier. Austin Eckler, though, is definitely an S tier running back. I mean, the dude just racks up so many yards in both the rushing and receiving game. He's a huge part of that offense. Also, I almost forgot, he has 757, I think, rushing yards, like 11 touchdowns, and then like 659 receiving yards, like 5 more touchdowns. So I almost have to say his stats there for a second, but in case you're wondering, yeah, he is just one of the better running backs in the league for sure. Next is Isaiah Pacheco, who has 735 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns as of right now. I think he's done absolutely great as a rookie. I don't think he'll hit 1,000 on the season with only about 2 games left, and the Chiefs don't run the ball very much. Let's see, it's like 2 pretty good games. But I think going forward in the next year, I think he's going to be very good. I honestly think next year he could move up to like that A tier running back slot. But as of right now, I'd say B tier. And I don't think really any Chiefs wide receiver or running back, while Mahomes, the quarterback, is going to make it to A tier, at least in the rushing game, unless they get a running back that like just gets a ton of receiving yards and touchdowns, because they're just a pass first team really when it comes down to it. So rushing wise, the running backs just don't have a lot of opportunities. Like if Pacheco got more carries all year, or even Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they would probably be A tier and they'd probably be able to produce more, but that's just not how it goes. So that's why I have them both in the B tier for right now. Next is Jonathan Taylor, who had 861 yards and 6 touchdowns this year. No, wait, no, it is 4 touchdowns this year. Sorry. He, I think, was a big disappointment fantasy wise, and even for the team, he didn't really carry, I guess, like he did last year. But you know what? One player should be carrying your team, and I think before the season they even said like they didn't want him to get the carry, like to get the ball every single play, because you know that's how people get injured, like Christian McCaffrey in the past. I think he's still an A tier running back for sure. If he was healthy this year, he'd have, I mean, obviously a way better year. But I think even with him missing games, he still did fairly well. The Colts, as an offense, were not that great this year, especially with Matt Ryan in. So I think with the yards he was able to put up and some of the touchdowns was, I guess, pretty good compared to how bad the rest of the offense was. Next is Nyheim Hines, who has, I think, 33 yards and 1 touchdown in the year, so he's just going to go in D. Like, you know, 1 touchdown is cool, but 33 yards is not going to cut it. Next is Deion Jackson, who had 191 yards and, I think, 1 touchdown or maybe 2 on the year. He's just going to go in D as well. Like I said, the Colts just really have not been great in offense. Jonathan Taylor has done pretty well. And, I mean, I guess Deion Jackson's been pretty solid, but, like, compared to other players, I can't put him on the same tier as, like, Kareem Hunt or Gus Edwards. So, he's going to go in D tier as well. Next, Antonio Gibson has 546 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and also, like, 343 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, who is barely going to get into the B category, because honestly, he would be a C tier, but his ability to also get the ball in the receiving game and be a reliable option there and also score touchdowns is what makes me want to put him just a little higher. I cannot talk for some reason right now. A little higher up than Gus Edwards and Kareem Hunt. So he's probably a low tier B tier, a low end B tier running back, I'd say. I'm not sure why I cannot talk right now. Seriously, it's really bad. But yeah, so compared to the other running backs up there, he definitely has less rushing yards, but because of his ability to do both, I think he does belong in the B tier. Next is Jeff Wilson, who has 743 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. He is definitely a B tier running back. He was involved in the Christian McCaffrey trade, so he since left San Francisco and went to Miami, where he still did pretty good in that offense, which, while, you know, Miami like kind of likes to pass the ball a bit more than rush the ball, but still I think he's done very well, and it's definitely a B tier running back. Next is Brian Robinson, who has 710 yards and 2 touchdowns, and I feel like I'm really stacking up this tier, but I think he's also a B tier running back. Washington's been a very interesting team this year, and Brian Robinson Jr. started off very slow. Obviously, making the comeback after getting shot in the offseason was incredible, and I think at first it was kind of very slow with some of his games, but he's since picked it up, and I think he looks very promising. I think next year he's going to be really, really good, but right now I think he's still probably in that B tier. But he also probably won't get 1,000 yards, but, you know, again, still for a rookie year after being shot is very impressive. Next is Ezekiel Elliott, who this might seem a little weird. I'm going to put in B tier. He has about 828 rushing yards this year with 11 touchdowns, and while the 11 touchdowns is really nice, also, like, it's kind of, you know, a lot of them have been from, like, the 1 yard line, which I don't want to, like, discredit that, but, like, it does sometimes inflate people's stats like that. I think Zeke is definitely probably slowing down and kind of, like, on that decline. But he has had a very good year. I think he is definitely a B tier running back, but someone else on that team is not a B tier running back. And that someone is Tony Pollard, who has 988 rushing yards for 3 touchdowns, and then also 371 receiving yards for 3 more touchdowns. I was completely wrong. I'm not sure why I said 3. He has 988 rushing yards with 9 touchdowns. 3 is only receiving touchdowns. So he's been very, very good for the Cowboys. I think he is better than Zeke. It feels like Jerry Jones doesn't want him to be better than Zeke, but like Pollard's production is always incredible, and I think he's a huge part of that offense, like especially in the receiving game. What he's able to do is very, very impressive. So he's an A tier running back in my opinion. Next is Raheem Mostert, who has 791 rushing yards with 3 touchdowns and also 150 receiving yards for 1 more touchdown. And once again, he's going to be in the B tier category, but I promise coming up though we have more variety. Just stick it out with the B tier with me. He's been very good for the Dolphins. Like I said, the Dolphins passing game has been incredible this year with Tua, and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Just so much speed on that offense. And Mostert, who's also quite fast himself, has been very good in the rushing game. So I think he's a B tier running back. And I know it might seem weird to have some of these guys in B tier right now, but some of the players we haven't named yet, like the A tier and S tier, are going to get filled up, which is kind of to wait it out with me. Next is Chase Edmonds, who has like 166 for 2 with touchdowns rushing, and like 118 for 1 more, I think, receiving. He's going to go in the D tier. His ability to do both in the rushing and receiving game is impressive, but overall his yardage there's not a lot there. He doesn't really do that consistently enough to be higher up on this list, so he's just going to fall into the D category. Next is Miles Sanders, who has 1,175 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns, who is definitely an A tier running back. That Eagles offense is so good. They have Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, and Miles Sanders in the backfield. So they have a lot of weapons. And, you know, they're able to score in a lot of ways. And Sanders has been very reliable with that this year. I think in the offseason it was a little questionable if he was even worth, like, drafting in fantasy football leagues. And I guess if you took that risk, it definitely paid off. Next is Cordell Patterson, who has 635 yards and 6 touchdowns rushing. He's going to go in the C tier category. I think he's been pretty good, but he was injured for a lot of it. So if he wasn't injured, I'm sure he'd be a B tier running back. But because he's been injured, it's just, you know, there's not enough there. And I know that injured categories there, but it's more for like season ending type stuff where like it really disrupted the player's stats, which obviously any injury will, especially like Patterson. I think he missed 4 or 5 weeks. But I think he's still got enough yards up there where it's fair to rank him. So he'll fall in a C tier running back category for right now. However, next is Tyler Algier, who has 827 rushing yards and like I think 2 or 3 touchdowns and like 127 rushing yards for 1 more touchdown. He is going to be a B tier running back. He's been very good for the Falcons. The Falcons offense has been a little weird this year with like Mariota not giving the ball to Kyle Pitts, which is very surprising with Pitts not being super productive this year. And then as of very recent, they finally benched Mariota, put in Desmond Ridder. But the one constant I will say has been Tyler Algier. He's been very, very good for a rookie, and I think he's going to be very promising for them in the coming years as well. Next is Saquon Barkley, who has 1,254 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, and also 343 receiving yards. He is another S tier running back when healthy, and since he's been healthy this year, he has not disappointed. He's just so good for the Giants offense. I mean, there was a stretch there at the beginning of the season where they're like 6-0 or so, where Saquon was like doing everything for them. And not to discredit Daniel Jones, who's had a pretty good year himself, but Saquon is just so good when he's healthy, and it's really exciting to see him healthy and being able to produce like he is right now in this, I mean, you know, I guess a few weeks and maybe even playoffs left to play. Next is Travis Etienne, who has 1,000 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns and 267 receiving yards. He is an A tier running back, at least in my opinion. He is so young, came off an injury, or season-ending injury actually, so it's his first full season with Trevor and the Jaguars, and he's done very well. I know he was projected to have a big year, and he has not disappointed. I think he will continue to do so, not only this year, but in the coming years, as the Jaguars are honestly probably only going to get better, and that includes Travis Etienne. Next is Dave Montgomery, who has 756 rushing yards and about 5 or 6 touchdowns, and he also has like 304 receiving yards, also, I think 2 touchdowns there. And this is a tricky one because I want to have him in B, but 1,000 yards from scrimmage is a quite good year. But would I say he's an A tier running back? Probably not. So he's going to fall into that B tier. He's had a very good season. I swear the Bears are like the most entertaining three-win team to watch like ever, with him and Justin Fields. Darnell Mooney unfortunately got hurt midway through the year. But overall, I think Dave Montgomery has had a good season. I want to put him in an A tier, but I just don't think he is an A tier running back. I think he's done well this season, but overall, I don't think there's really enough there. If he had more receiving yards or even just more rushing yards in general, he probably would be an A tier running back, I'd say. I think touchdowns don't matter too much as far as like how much he already has. So I think he'll fall in the B tier for right now. Next is James Robinson, who has 425 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, and also has about 51 receiving yards, like 2 more touchdowns. He is going to go in the C tier list. He started off really hot this year, then got traded to the Jets after Breece Hall went down, and he had a very good year, honestly, considering he came off like a torn Achilles. So I would say he's a C tier running back. I think he's only going to get better, though. It's going to be interesting with the Jets backfield because they'll have him and Breece Hall, and I think Michael Carter as well. And then as of right now, they have like Zonovan Knight, I think. So very interesting. A lot of very solid running backs in that Jets backfield. It'll be interesting to see where they all go because I can't keep all of them. I would assume James Robinson stays there, but we'll see what happens. Overall, though, very good year for James Robinson. I think if he stayed on one team, honestly, or just got a consistent amount of carries, he would be higher than C tier. But what he's kind of finished with this year, I don't think is enough to be much higher than C. Next is Breece Hall, who had 463 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 218 receiving yards for 2 more touchdowns, which is crazy because I could put him in C tier, and he didn't even play the whole season. So he is going to go in the injured category. His stats before getting injured were very, very good, as you just heard. So if he plays a full year next year, which I think he should be able to because he got hurt fairly early in the year, he is going to be a monster for the Jets, and I'm really excited to see a full season of Breece Hall. So yeah, I want to put him higher, but like I feel like it's not fair to give him like C tier when he was on track to have a much better year than that. So he's going to fall into our injured category. Next is DeAndre Swift, who had 439 rushing yards and I believe about 3 or 4 touchdowns, and then like 289 receiving yards for like 2 more touchdowns. I know he's fought injuries as well, but he's going to go in the C tier because some of the times it wasn't like he was out for like a ton of games. Sometimes they just like limit him, which I know is still an injury. But like Breece Hall having like a season-ending injury is kind of like what that category is meant for. So we'll put him in C tier. The Lions' offense has been very fun to watch. DeAndre Swift at the beginning of the year was very fun to watch himself, and he still is. It's just with Jamal Williams back there is very good himself, and then they also have Amon-Ra St. Brown in the pass game. So the Lions are going to be very good in the coming years. I feel like people have been saying that like for a long time now. But like they got Jameson Williams, they have DeAndre Swift. Jared Goff seems to be pretty solid. So I think just give the Lions more time, they'll be very good. DeAndre Swift, a very solid year, but not much higher than C tier in my opinion. Next is Jamal Williams, who has 850 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns, which I believe is the league high right now. He is probably a B tier running back, I would say. He's having a great year. His touchdowns, a lot of them have been from the 1 yard line, which is needed context. But still, if you're scoring touchdowns, you're scoring touchdowns. I think overall he still should be a B tier running back. I think the guys in the A tier either have a lot of rushing yards or both a lot of rushing yards and receiving yards. I know Jonathan Taylor has pretty similar stats to Jamal Williams, but I think the situation that Taylor was in is probably worse than Williams because the Lions' offense is like one of the highest ranked this year, and the Colts was terrible. So what Taylor was able to do with also a not very good offensive line, I think was more deserving to have him there. So I know that might seem a little questionable, and like I acknowledge that, but that's what I have for right now. At the end, I'll always go through and move stuff around as well if I don't like the way it looks. So just keep that in mind. Next is Aaron Jones, who has 962 rushing yards for, I think, about 4 or 5 touchdowns, and then like 210 receiving yards for 2 more touchdowns. The Packers have been a very interesting team to watch this year. Aaron Jones, I am going to put in A tier because of his ability to, I guess, like, his impact, I guess, in the rushing and receiving game. And I mean, he doesn't score like the most touchdowns in the world this year, but he's been very good. And the Packers like somehow have a playoff chance somehow. And like honestly, that wouldn't be possible without Aaron Jones. Also, I can't remember how many receiving touchdowns I said, but he has 5. I think I said 2 or 3. He has more than that. He has 5 receiving and 2 rushing, which again is pretty good to be able to do that in both the receiving and rushing games. So I think that's more deserving to have him in that A tier category. Next is A.J. Dillon, who has 696 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns with about 200 receiving yards to go along with that. I'm going to put him in the B tier category. I know he has a little kind of low, I guess, on rushing yards compared to the rest of the guys in the B tier category, but because of his 200 receiving yards, I feel like it has to boost him a certain amount, and the guys in the C tier category just don't have that. So I feel like he's probably a low-end B tier running back. I think it's a bit of a disappointing year. I think like fantasy-wise, he was projected to have, I think, a lot more, I guess, yards and touchdowns this year. And the Packers, overall, I think kind of had a disappointing season, so he's just kind of fallen into that as well. But I think at the end of the day, he is still a B tier running back. Next is Chuba Hubbard, who has 357 rushing yards and like 3 touchdowns. Now, first off, I'm not sure why D'Onta Foreman is not on this list. Like, it's a little disrespectful in my opinion, because the dude is very good, definitely better than Chuba. Until this past weekend when the Panthers ran all over the Lions, Hubbard didn't really have that many rushing yards, only about 200. So honestly, I'm just going to put him in the D tier. He hasn't been that good this year. Foreman has been way better than him. He'd be a B tier running back, in my opinion. Hubbard, though, not that great this season, so we'll just put him in the D tier for right now. Next is Ramondre Stevenson, though, who has 984 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, and then like another 300-something receiving yards and 1 touchdown, who is A tier, in my opinion. I have to brag a little bit in my fantasy football leagues. I kind of like would watch a few things fantasy related, seeing that this guy was projected to have a pretty good year, that he was kind of turning heads in camp and everything in his second year. And so I picked him, definitely paid off. And then just the Patriots in general have had such a just bad year offensively. It's not been good. But Stevenson, though, has been that one bright spot for them in both the rushing and receiving game. Definitely an A tier running back, in my opinion. Next is Damian Harris, who has 383 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, I'm going to be honest. I know he was injured. I don't know if he still is. So I'm going to put him in injured. If he played more games than I realized, then he's probably like D tier. But honestly, I don't know, so I don't want to be like, oh, he's up here, when in reality he like didn't play that much and he should be in the injured category. So I'm just gonna leave him there. I may be wrong. I really don't know. Just gonna be honest with you guys. So he'll just go in the injured category though. Next is Josh Jacobs, who has 1,500 and like I think 539 rushing yards, I think, and like 11 touchdowns, and like 370 receiving yards to go along with that. And he is definitely an S tier running back this season. The Raiders have been a crazy team to watch. They have lost very close games. They've played terrible other games. Carr's looked bad. Josh Jacobs, though, has been very, very good, which might be a bit of a surprise to some people, because I think the Raiders even declined his 5th-year option, too, so he definitely wants that money now. But yeah, so overall, Josh Jacobs, very, very good this year, definitely S tier. Not many running backs really better than him this year, honestly. Next is Khalil Herbert, who has 650 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns, and then also like 50 receiving yards, like 1 more touchdown. He's C tier. He's been very solid. The Bears have had a very good rushing attack this year with David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, and Justin Fields, who can, do it with his legs, obviously. I don't think he's really B tier, but I wouldn't say he's D tier either. I think he's been very solid, so we'll have him in C tier for right now. Next is Cam Akers, who has 559 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. He's had a bit of a disappointing season, I feel like. He's gotten better, I guess, the year's gone on. The Rams as a whole have not. But Akers, I guess you can say he kind of finished pretty strong. I wouldn't say B tier, but he did at least get himself out of the D tier from earlier this season, and I think C tier is probably a good fit for him. Next is J.K. Dobbins. Now, I'm going to put him in the injured category because he came back, but he's been injured for a while. I think it had been since like week 6 at one point. I could be wrong, but it had been a while. But since he's been back, he's had like 367 rushing yards since then, so he's been very solid once he's been back, but I think just to be fair, I'll put him in the injured category. For anyone that's interested though, Dobbins on the year has 427 rushing yards with like I think 4 touchdowns maybe, and then like receiving he has like 1 more touchdown I think, so fairly solid, especially since he's come back as well. Next is Kenyon Drake, who has 422 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, I believe, maybe 4 touchdowns. Wait, actually, let me check that. Yeah, it was 3 touchdowns. That's how to make sure that I don't want to, like, make him seem like 1 touchdown better. I don't know. I'm just joking. But yeah, so he's had a fairly solid season. I don't think anything to really like show off, but he's been very reliable when they've needed him, so he's a C tier running back in my opinion. Next is Alvin Kamara, who's had 717 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and also another 480 receiving yards and 2 more touchdowns. He's going to go in the A tier running back. I wouldn't say S tier. I think he has definitely been in the past. This year, though, I think it's probably pretty similar with the rest of the guys in the A tier list. He's done both very well in the rushing and receiving game, which seems to be a very common pattern in the A tier, except for like Miles Sanders and Jonathan Taylor. The rest have been very good in both the rushing and receiving game. So Alvin Kamara, definitely A tier running back. Next is Mark Ingram, who's had like 253 rushing yards and like 1 touchdown. He'll just go in the D category. Nothing really to show off there. Next is Rashad Penny, who had 346 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns before he unfortunately got injured. And that's the category he's going to go into. He was honestly having a pretty good season until I think broke his leg. So hopefully he comes back just as good next year, because he was honestly having a pretty good year before he got injured. Next is Kenneth Walker, who had 803 yards and I believe it says 9 touchdowns, which is a very good rookie year. I'm going to put him in B tier, and since I do that, I'm going to actually move Jonathan Taylor down, because I've realized stats-wise, the people in B tier just seem to be way more kind of consistent with Taylor than people in the A tier. So hopefully that doesn't upset anybody. I'm sure it will. I'm sorry, but I think that's probably the right move. Honestly, if anything, I'd want to put Kenneth Walker in A tier over Taylor, because Walker didn't have the expectations Taylor did. But to Walker, though, he's had a great rookie year. Seahawks have been a surprise on every side of the ball with Geno Smith and Walker and Tyreek Woolen. They have, honestly, I think, a bright future. That rush trade was the best possible thing they could have done. They had like a top 5 pick, and they've had a pretty good season. So they're only going to get better, and it's very, very impressive to see. Next is Najee Harris, who has 843 rushing yards and I believe 6 touchdowns. And then also receiving-wise, he has like 202 more touchdowns. He started out kind of slow, but I think he's honestly got like much better as the year's gone on. He had like a injury in his foot as well. He was dealing with like a lot of the year, so I think he's honestly had a pretty good year, and he's an A tier running back. Next is Dameon Pierce, who has 939 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns, and I believe about another 100 yards receiving with 1 more touchdown. He is definitely an A tier running back, at least in my opinion. He's a great rookie year. I would say he's had a slightly better year than Kenneth Walker, but I think it's because Dameon Pierce started out hotter and then slowly got kind of cold. And then Kenneth Walker has kind of came in mid-season and started out hot, had a bit of a cold streak, but he's, overall, I think, more consistent. So Dameon Pierce's stats are technically better, but I think what makes me put him in the A tier is that he has a way worse situation than Kenneth Walker did. I mean, Pierce was getting force-fed the ball as a rookie on a terrible team and is able to produce pretty well. So, in my opinion, I'm going to say A tier running back, but both are going to be absolutely great for a lot of years to come, hopefully. Next is Joe Mixon, who had 787 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, and then I think about 200 yards receiving with 2 more touchdowns. And luckily, I got to see majority of those touchdowns in one game against the Panthers live, so that was great. Joe Mixon this year, though, I want to say just really a B tier running back. He's kind of struggled. He hasn't been as explosive. I think he was dealing with an injury at the beginning of the season. Overall, though, hasn't been spectacular. He had a concussion at one point, and Samaje Perine, who we're going to get to in a second, I'm not going to say anything about, but honestly, I'll just wait to get there to finish that thought. I can't remember if I just said Mix had 400 yards or 200 yards. I've been filming this video for so long now, but he had 400 yards receiving, so still very good. Over 1,000 yards total in the year, but I just think overall he's a more of a B tier running back. Next is Derrick Henry, who has 1,424 rushing yards and like 13 touchdowns, I think it said. And then he also has 370 receiving yards, who is an S tier running back. I mean, people are saying he's going to start slowing down, and it really does not look like it. I'm sure he will at some point, like all players do, but this year was not that year. He's been the entire team for the Titans. And yeah, there's really nothing else to say there. Next is Dalvin Cook, who has 1,109 yards rushing with 8 touchdowns, and another like 200 yards receiving with 2 more touchdowns. Dalvin Cook is probably as close to S tier as you can get with being A tier, I want to say. I think he's one of the better A tier running backs for sure, but I just don't think he's to that S tier yet. S tier is really when you either have a ton of rushing yards or you have a ton of both rushing and receiving yards, or you're just you just carry your team, is what it seems like. Cook really isn't the face of that team, which, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you're producing, which he has. But I think compared to the other running backs on that list, I would have him slightly below them on a tier list. And this is a tier list, so that's why he's on the A tier. Next is Alexander Mattison, who has 191 receiving yards and like 3 touchdowns. And then I think like another 70 receiving yards and 1 more touchdown. He's just going to go in the D tier. Not a lot of yards of either one. Has a few touchdowns. Just, you know, it's very clutch for him. But overall, compared to the other running backs, I really can't put him much higher than the D tier. Next is Samaje Perine, who has 376 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And then another like 300 yards and 4 touchdowns receiving. He's going to go in C tier because he's honestly been very solid for Joe Mixon while he's been out. That one game, I think it was the Chiefs. He had like, I think 3 touchdowns, I want to say. Maybe that wasn't Chiefs. Maybe that was like the game before. I really can't remember. But log one in my head. It's been like well over an hour filming this video. So I'm sorry. Hopefully I'm close enough. But regardless, he's been very solid in Mixon's absence. So I think, honestly, he's a C2 running back. He's had a pretty good year, and he's a very reliable option in both the rushing and receiving game for them. Next is Devin Singletary, who has 790 yards and 5 touchdowns, and then also about 270 receiving yards and a couple more touchdowns to go with that. He's going to be a B tier running back in my opinion, but definitely one of the better B tier running backs, just like Jonathan Taylor. I wouldn't really put him in A tier because the Bills once again just seem to pass a lot with Josh Allen. So, you know, why would you not pass? Devin Singletary, when given the ball, has been very good this year, so definitely one of the higher B-tier running backs. Next is Javonte Williams, who had 204 yards before getting injured, so once again, he's going to fall in that injured category. Next is Latavius Murray, who's had 601 yards and 5 touchdowns. Pretty solid, honestly. He's going to go into C tier. Not a whole lot to say there. I mean, he just, you know, he's come in and really done his thing. Him, Gus Edwards, both, I think, are C tier running backs, so I mean, I think Edwards has a bit less than him, so I guess you could say maybe Latavius Murray's like a high C tier, low B tier running back. But I think, I mean, I wouldn't put him in D tier at all, but I wouldn't put him in B. I wouldn't put him in B or D tier, so I think C is the right fit for him. Next is Nick Chubb with 1,344 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns. And I mean, he has to be S tier. I know that's 6, so for those of you like want like a top 5, you can make your own from my S tier then if you want. I feel like that's a fair S tier. But Nick Chubb is just the Browns team, honestly. Brissett played well before Watson took over, but Nick Chubb has been the one constant with both quarterbacks. And though the Browns are eliminated, Nick Chubb still had a spectacular season, and he really carried my fantasy team early on, I gotta say. Also, I think it said 13 touchdowns. He has 12 touchdowns, so 1 less. That's my bad. Next, Elijah Mitchell, who has 224 rushing yards, and he's going to go in the injured category because I just don't feel that he's really done enough to be any higher. So that is going to be our tier list as of right now. We'll just go over it real quick, see if we want to move anything around, and if not, that's fine too. But S tier, we have Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and Nick Chubb. A tier, we have Tony Pollard, Miles Sanders, Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Dameon Pierce, and Dalvin Cook. B tier, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Leonard Fournette, James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, Antonio Gibson, Jeff Wilson, Brian Robinson, Ezekiel Elliott, Raheem Mostert, Tyler Algier, David Montgomery, Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon, Kenneth Walker, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, and Devin Singletary. C tier, we have Gus Williams, we have Kareem Hunt, Cordell Patterson, James Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Darrell Henderson, Kenyon Drake, Samaje Perine, and Latavius Murray. I couldn't think of his name for some reason. And then D tier, we have Melvin Gordon, Eno Benjamin. We have both Deion Jackson and Nyheim Hines. Couldn't think it for a second. And then Chase Edmonds, Chuba Hubbard, Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay, and then Alexander Mattison. And then the injured category, we have Breece Hall, Damian Harris, J.K. Dobbins, Rashad Penny, Javonte Williams, and then finally Elijah Mitchell. So that's our tier list. I'm not going to move anything around, I don't think. I honestly kind of like how everything is. Yeah, I'm like looking at it like Jonathan Taylor I think belongs in that B category. If anything, I would probably move someone to A. And if I were going to do that, I would probably move Kenneth Walker to A tier. But overall, you know what? I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at this. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. This is our ending tier list of all the running backs. But yeah, so yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. That's just going to do it for the video. If you guys did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. If you disagree with anything, which I'm sure some of you do, comment that down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.